I want to welcome everyone to the Hawaii Association of International Buddhists Earth Day program and our annual meeting for 2022. I'd like to ask that everyone who is able to turn on your video. It makes for a better meeting. If you can't do that, okay. But nice to do that for all of us, and out of respect to our speakers who are showing themselves fully for this event. So thank you for that. And do keep your mic muted and your video on if you can. Thank you. Our schedule this afternoon. First, let me ask, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Make some noise or something if you can't. Our schedule this afternoon will include the keynote address by Dr. Sponsel, followed by comments from our three distinguished respondents. After this, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions, and I'll say a little more about that when the time comes. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with HABE, a very warm welcome to you. The Hawaii Association of International Buddhists, or HABE, as we call it for short, is an organization of individual Buddhists, really, with diverse backgrounds who come together to learn from one another and to celebrate the unity of our various Buddhist traditions here in Hawaii. This is HABE's 30th anniversary year, and our Earth Day program today is one of the programs that HABE is doing each month during this 30th anniversary year of 2022. Some of the other programs that we're working on for this year include a Vesak Day celebration at the full moon in May. We're working on a Juneteenth program, which will be in June, of course, and recognizing the enslavement of our African American brothers and sisters in the United States. In August, there will be a sushi making class led by our board member, Steve Toyoshima. Reverend Steve is with the Higashi Honganji. And in November, we will have hopefully an in-person big event as an anniversary celebration for HABE. There are other events planned, and to learn more about them, please go to our website. The HABE website is hawaiibuddhists.org. hawaiibuddhists.org. There, if you click on the posts heading, you'll find a listing of events that are happening, and some which have happened already. So I hope you will take advantage of that. Enough for that. We will begin our program with a recitation of the Vow of Humankind. And Porani, if you would put that up on the screen, and I will ask Reverend Jiko Nakade to lead us in this recitation. Please join along if you can, but keep your mic muted so we don't get the voices all mixed up. Thank you. Reverend Jiko, please.
Vow of humankind, calm and composed, awakening to our true self, practicing ardently our compassion, making full use of our abilities, according to our respective vocations, discerning suffering, both individual and social, and its causes, recognizing the right course for history to proceed. Let us join hands as kin beyond the differences of race, nation, and class. With love and compassion, we vow to bring to realization humankind's deep desire for liberation by making every effort to create a world that is peaceful and joyous.
Thank you, Reverend Jiko. I'd now like to ask our Board of Directors member and our internet wizard, Reverend Hirosato Yoshida, will now introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Sponsel.
Good morning, or sorry, good afternoon. I'm so used to having these meetings in the morning. It's like, excuse me, but good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reverend Hirosato Yoshida, and I am a minister at Soto Mission. I am the director for social media and intergenerational programs, and I'm happy to introduce you today's special guest, Dr. Leslie Sponsel. But a quick story on my connection with Dr. Sponsel. I was studying anthropology and religion at University of Hawaii. So today, in the spirit, I wore my Aloha shirt. And one of the courses that I took from at UH was a class from Dr. Sponsel, and I'm very fortunate to have been able to take the class. And that course was called Spiritual Ecology. And I remember doing a presentation. It was like a class, one of the tests. And in that, I've shared how Shinto tradition, the Japanese Shinto tradition, incorporates ties between humans and environment. And I can't quite remember how well I did in class, but it sure was an important class that I took that I definitely had to say that it led me to who I am today. And as I practiced and teach Buddhism, I have always been wondering how we can get more youth in our congregation. And one of the thoughts I have been having in the recent year is that young people around my age is very busy with parenting, work, and so forth. But I see that a lot of them are interested in ecology and sustainability for the future. And this is when I always reflect back on the class, the things I learned from Dr. Sponsel over 15 years ago. And being part of this HAVE, I had this opportunity to see if Dr. Sponsel would be happy to share his teachings to our membership. And so I'd like to introduce you to everyone, Dr. Leslie Sponsel. He is a humanistic scientist who earned his BA in geology from Indiana University in 1965 and an MA in 1973 and PhD in anthropology from Cornell University in 1981. He has taught at 7 universities in 4 countries, including twice as a Fulbright Fellow in Venezuela and later Thailand over 4 decades. Through 4 decades in his teachings career. In 1981, he was hired at University of Hawaii to develop and direct the ecological anthropology program. And although he is currently retired as Professor Emeritus since 2010, he continues to share and teach one course each semester, including spiritual ecology, sacred places, and anthropology of Buddhism. Dr. Sponsel wasn't retired yet when I was a student, but I had the luck of drawing the spiritual ecology class being offered during the semester when I needed the credit. And thank Buddha for that, because if it wasn't for that, the law of cause and effect would not have led me to suggest this event 16 years later. And he continues to devote his time and research and publications focusing on the interface of ecology, religion, and peace. Dr. Sponsel has published numerous journal articles, books, chapters, encyclopedia entries, and books. And his monograph, Spiritual Ecology, A Quiet Revolution, won the science category of the Green Book Award in San Francisco in 2014. And he has a website called Spiritual Ecology, and that link is on our homepage. So please do check that later. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to Dr. Leslie Sponsel. And thank you very much for being our guest keynote speaker today. And if we had a lay that we could give it to you. We'll love to share that lay on you, but because if we're doing it on Zoom, please accept the digital lay. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get set up here.
Oh, no, it's okay. You can, yeah. Okay. You can speak, right? So you
Okay.
should.
Aloha, everybody, and mahalo for that very kind introduction to Hirosato, who is now Reverend Hirosato Yoshida, after I haven't seen you for about 16 years. Nice to see you again. And mahalo to the people who organized this event, to the 3 respondents, and to everyone here in the audience. We're setting up the PowerPoint here.
Right. Just show that. Okay. Okay. How come I don't see you? I just saw Hiro. Okay. There. Okay. Okay. So can people hear you? Can you speak?
Can everybody hear me? It's okay.
Yes, we can all hear you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put you on as a spotlight for everyone. So everybody's going to be watching your screen only.
Right.
My.
Yeah, I know. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, you
It's
can
okay.
continue.
Okay, I'm going to be talking about natural wisdom and making the argument that Buddhism is naturally wise, including for ecology and environmentalism. And of course, Buddhism and Buddhists are a huge topic, a lot of complexity and diversity. And ideally, I should be talking about each of these items in relation to ecology and environmentalism. But that would take an entire course for a semester. And so I'm going to be speaking about Buddhism and Buddhists in a kind of generic way, but also with reference to Thailand and Theravada Buddhism. Okay. Just a second, my technician is just adjusting things here.
Okay, you can continue.
Okay. So doesn't. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my experience with Buddhism in Thailand. My wife and I have been collaborating on this subject. We visit Thailand every summer, except for the last couple years because of the pandemic. And we hope things will settle down. We'll be able to go back. She has helped collaborating with field research and also helping with my writing about these subjects. And I've also done a lot of library research as well. My book, Spiritual Ecology, came out in 2012, and it has 4 chapters relevant to Buddhism. And what I'm going to say today is really from the chapter on the Buddha. There are also chapters on Joanna Macy and William Merwin, and also on Tibetan Buddhism. But I'm mainly using that first chapter on the Buddha, natural wisdom, as the basis of this talk. And the question here, you can see, and as I go through this, I'll occasionally ask you to read a few texts for yourself. And if there's any problem with your reading them, they're not large enough on the screen or whatever, please let me know. Most of the research and publications on this subject focus on one of these three of the triple gem or triple refuge. Usually the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, but sometimes Sangha, environmental activists, monks, and so on. But I've tried to be more holistic and to address all three. So let's look at each of those in return, and then the laity, and then some problems and some criticisms and some resources. And I will try to keep on time. First of all, the Buddha, his life was in the context of nature, and that was the source of his enlightenment. The various phases of his life, birth, enlightenment, etc., were all associated with particular trees. And the Jatakas are legends of the previous lives of the Buddha that really illustrate the virtues of core virtues of Buddhism and their deal with animals. So right there is a connection with nature. Now I ask you if you would first read this. Everything was outdoors. And this is Putatasa Bhikkhu, who is a scholar, forest monk. You can look at their website, Suan Mok. And the Buddha was concerned with the environment. I don't know whether you would call him an environmentalist or not, or an ecologist, especially in the modern sense of the terms. But during his life, and this is just one resource, this is a Buddhologist, Donald Swearer, and the basic point here, we won't read the whole thing because of time, but the basic point is that the agrarian economy was expanding during the Buddha's lifetime, and that resulted in deforestation. And he must have been aware of that, among other impacts of humans on the environment during his lifetime. The first sermon that he gave was in Deer Park, and he touched on these various attributes of Buddhism. And also the Jatakas are 547 legends, as I've mentioned, about his previous lives. And for 4 centuries after the Buddha's death, he was not symbolized by a human figure, but rather often by a footprint maybe, or by a lion or a tiger, or other aspects of nature as symbols of the Buddha. In particular, the Bodhi tree, the tree itself, or the characteristic leaf, or the lotus. Now, turning to the Dharma, if here is really the pivotal thing that leads to my argument about natural wisdom of Buddhism, if it refers to all beings in various ways, not just humans, but all beings, then I think naturally it follows from that Buddhism has relevance for ecology and environmentalism. And if you can read that quote, please. This really encapsulates what my talk is about, and again, the basic argument that I'm putting forth. And it's remarkable that in this book, which is really fascinating, Buddhist Biology by David Barash, he identifies a number of parallels between Buddhism and ecology, not identities, but very similar. And here they are. And the net of Indra is one example illustrated here of the interconnections and the interdependence of everything, all beings, all things. Four Noble Truths, again, all existence is suffering. And the Noble Eightfold Path, a number of these components, if we think in terms of ecology and environmentalism, they can be applied, like right livelihood, right action, right effort, and so forth. Indeed, with many key concepts in Buddhism, you prefix them with eco and think about that. I think you can find some relevance. All sentient beings. And take, for example, cockroaches. Have you ever tried to capture a cockroach with your hand? They are obviously sentient beings. And in Buddhism, there is an issue as to just what is sentient. Recent scientific research shows that plants are sentient. In forests, trees communicate with one another via their root network and fungi sending chemical signals. The Metta Sutta, look at all the different kinds of beings it refers to, even beings yet to be born. And here, I'll let you read this cartoon. Dennis the Menace may not be a Buddhist, but I think he was acting with empathy and compassion here in reference to this bug that his companion had swallowed, and has a very different reaction. The middle way, a basic concept in Buddhism, not going to either extreme of minimal or maximal living, distinguishing between need and greed. In other words, in a nutshell, voluntary simplicity, and thereby reducing suffering and also one's ecological footprint or environmental impact. Now turning to the third of the triple refuge or triple gems, the Sangha. Here, my wife, back around 1985, along with a Thai biology colleague, were interviewing a monk about medicinal plants that he maintains and cultivates in the temple yard for healing people, for relieving suffering, one way. And the Sangha, in the narrow sense of monks and nuns, there are many rules for monks, over 200 of them, many of them dealing with not harming other beings. This is again Bhutatassa Bhikkhu. And he is the founder of a forest monastery, Swanmo, in southern Thailand. In 1932, it's an area of over 122 acres of forest, not only a sanctuary for the monks and people who visit and meditate in the area, and they have an international meditation center, incidentally, but it's also a sanctuary, a refuge for biological diversity, the variety of species in that forest reserve. It's surrounded by wet rice paddies and rubber tree plantations. And if it weren't for this monk, the forest probably wouldn't be there. Again, if you would please read this from Buddhist. This is another wonderful book on meditation in the wild, Buddhism's origins in the heart of nature. It's about the Thai forest monk tradition, although that is also practiced in some other countries as well. Often lone monks in the forest, meditating under trees, sometimes taking shelter in caves, and so forth. And here again, one more statement by Buddhist. From his writings, there can be no doubt that he saw the relevance of Buddhism, or what we today call ecology and environmentalism. So ideally, the Sangha reflects a sustainable green society. Not all, not everywhere, not all of the time, but these are various attributes of the Sangha, ideally. And at the lower part of the slide, spiritual development instead of economic development. I often wonder what Hawaii would be like if our focus was on spiritual development instead of economic development. And given the trajectory that we see on these limited islands, it's not sustainable. We are going to have to change the way we relate to nature in the islands. Monastics have power. An anthropologist, Victor Turner, used the term anti-structure to refer to behavior that challenges the structure of society. And in many ways, that's what monastics do. They offer a model of an alternative society. They have these various attributes. And traditionally in Thailand, schools were in the temples for children to learn. And some still are to this day, although they also now have a public school system and so on. The temples can serve as an educational function for environmentalism, and some are doing just that. So Porani and I published, co-authored a chapter in this book. It came out in 1997, hypothesizing about some possible ecological functions of temples. And here we list them. Not every temple has all of these attributes, but some have one or more. And I've already mentioned medicinal plant collections and educational centers. This is, I think, very interesting. Temples can be island refuges of biodiversity, sacred ecosystems. The forest around these temples is very limited in area. It wouldn't help conserve tigers or other large mammals, but in fact, the overwhelming majority of biodiversity is invertebrates, both in terms of the total weight on the planet and also the percentage of species. And if you consider that in Thailand, there are something like 40,000 temples, some of them centuries old. If you consider then collectively all of these temples many of which do have a forest around them, certainly not all, but some trees in them, and consider that over time the cumulative impact, then I think Thai temples can have some significance for biodiversity conservation. One specific example is tree ordination. An anthropologist, Susan Darlington, has studied this in northern Thailand for many years and published this book about it. Tree ordination involves monks ritually ordaining a giant tree in the forest as a surrogate monk. And they wrap the colored robes around them. And there are lay people attending, and even sometimes government officials witnessing this pre-ordination. About the worst crime in Buddhism is to kill a monk, and to kill a tree that has been ritually ordained is a crime. And this has been fairly effective. It's been going on since the 1980s, although it is a small percentage of the monks in Thailand. There are something like 300,000 monks in Thailand. But it is significant, and it has even gotten royal sponsorship from the previous king and recognition in various ways by the government as well as lay people. There is this tree project in which this monk encouraged his followers to plant trees, aiming for that number of trees. And there's a very nice YouTube interview with the monks, which you can find online. I wish we had time to show it, but if you're interested, you can pursue it. And he, in turn, has influenced other temples. There is a temple in central Thailand, which is basically a refuge for the open-billed stork on their seasonal migrations through Thailand. They have managed to create a refuge, the monks together with the Thai Wildlife Fund and government agencies for this stork, and stop poaching and other problems for the storks. Whereas in other areas of the migration route, the storks are often subjected to hunting and so on. Here's an interesting temple, beautiful. And guess what it's made of? 1.5 million beer bottles, green and brown beer bottles. Monks didn't drink the beer themselves. Rather, they gathered the bottles from the neighborhood and elsewhere and used them, recycling, to create this beautiful temple, which is we visited there, and it's really magnificent. In Thailand, there are something like 5,000 recorded caves, and in them 400 species have been recorded, although of course they're very small organisms. And there are something like 500 sacred caves that are known in Thailand, and many of them are in use by monks and also lay people. They are ideal places for meditation, quiet, dark, etc., for sustained deep meditation. And they are also emulating practices of the Buddha as well. Here is not Thailand, but Himalayas in India, a really fascinating book, Cave in the Snow, about a nun, Tibetan nun, who spent 12 years, 3 of them in total isolation. This is radical solitude in Earth Sanctuary, a cave for spiritual insight. And the front of the cave was walled off because of the cold there. Now, turning to the laity, these are various ways in which lay Buddhists might relate to ecology and environmentalism. And I'll touch on some of them. Sulak Sivaraksa is a lay Buddhist, socially engaged Buddhist. He's visited here in Hawaii and given a talk, and he's visited here several times. He wrote this book, The Wisdom of Sustainability, Buddhist Economics for the 21st Century. And he established in 1989 the International Network of Engaged Buddhists. And then more recently, an institute, which is in a forested area. It's a green community. They have vegetarian food, and they teach socially engaged Buddhism, and they even offer a master's degree. And this is international students. They also offer training in English and certificates. We visited there, and it's a wonderful program and open to anyone to apply. He also publishes Seeds of Peace since 1989. It has a website. The journal is available. It's free access, including an archive with past issues. Another country adjacent to Thailand, Cambodia, where the Buddhist Institute of Cambodia, together with the World Wildlife Fund, researched and developed this Cry from the Forest, a Buddhism and Ecology community learning text. And it is a magnificent resource. Buddhism spread, of course, into the West, and these are some of the more prominent Buddhists who are environmental activists as well. And in particular, I would mention Michael Soule, who is the founder of conservation biology, including the Society for Conservation Biology. Gary Snyder, a Zen Buddhist and famous poet, and Joanna Macy and William S. Merwin we'll talk about a little later. Here is Merwin. An awesome poet who developed over a period of 40 years a palm forest ecosystem on abandoned pineapple plantation land where the soils were just worn out. And he would plant 1 tree a day, especially during the rainy season, and ended up with a 19-acre palm forest, over almost 3,000 trees, 850 species, etc. This is on Maui. And in one of his poems, the poem titled Place, he says, "On the last day of the world, I would want to plant a tree." That's something to think about. You can also find more information about Merwin, of course, his many poetry and essays, books, but also the Merwin Conservancy. Joanna Macy, another amazing Buddhist, Zen, and she wrote this book, Active Hope, among many others. It used to be subtitled, the first edition, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy. I'm sorry that she changed the title, but I guess she decided this would be better for the revised edition. And again, you can go to her website and find out more about her. But another example of an environmental activist, Buddhist scholar and practitioner. Among other things, she distinguishes between business as usual, the industrial growth society, its fundamental pivotal fallacy of unlimited growth on a limited base. Uncontrolled growth that destroys its host, we call cancer. And in some ways, industrial growth society is a cancer on the planet. He talks about the great unraveling, including the degradation and disintegration of the environment and of societies and even collapse. Historians, archaeologists have documented many cases where societies have actually disintegrated and collapsed, and often for some connection with degrading their habitat. And then she points towards the great turning, which would be a life-sustaining and enhancing society, and argues that we're already on our way. And in my opinion, global climate change is going to accelerate this. The reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I think they just recently put out their 7th report. This is international consensus of climatologists and related scientists. And basically, global climate change is a reality. We see it in the increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, like California suffering from drought and wildfires. We see in the news recently the storms and the floods and the tornadoes in the eastern and southeastern US and so forth. And we hear about it elsewhere in the world. So it's already unraveling with global climate change. And I think global climate change is going to cover, in the short term, cause tremendous suffering, mass migrations, conflicts, and so forth. But in the long term, I think it will be a catalyst to transform societies to be more sustainable and greener. Some will disintegrate. Sometimes there will be wars and so forth. We already have seen refugees from Central America coming into the US, some of them climate refugees. Lay Buddhists and temples can pursue environmentalism in various ways, and not necessarily all of these, but some of these. And there have been at least 4 books, and of course, chapters in other books and journal articles critiquing rampant materialism and consumerism, and basically calling for the middle way and voluntary simplicity. Here's, I think, a profound quote. This is Peter Timmerman from an early book on Buddhism and Ecology in 1992. Bhutan is really a fascinating country where the government is really developing policy reflecting Buddhism. And it seems almost too good to be true, but there have been a number of studies, and it seems like it is true in many ways, in some degree. That quote from Timmerman really reflects the problem of ecological footprint. I calculated my ecological footprint. I am sorry to confess, with my lifestyle, which is fairly modest, I would need, if it was all humanity with the same level of lifestyle, 3 planets. You can calculate your own ecological footprint going to the website. Here's an environmental meditation on interbeing from Thich Nhat Hanh. This is something very appropriate to think about with the Red Hill situation in Hawaii, but any time to meditate on this. And I think this Earth Gatha, as he calls it, very nicely is relevant to our situation in Hawaii in general. He's written a couple of books. And also in recent years, a couple of more books that are addressing global climate change, and Dharma Teachers International, and the statements by them that you can find online, and the 16 core principles. I've already mentioned some of them, like interconnection and interdependence. Now, I searched Google in January of 2013 for these terms and received this number of results. And then again, I've done that periodically, and most recently in March of 2022. And you can see that for some of these terms in 2013, there were some thousands. But by this year, there are millions. This is exponential growth of interest in Buddhism, including Buddhist ecology and environmentalism under various terms. And of course, the websites that you find on Google vary in relevance and quality and so forth, but it does indicate tremendous growth of interest in this subject. And it's easy to predict that this will continue to increase, probably accelerate much more rapidly with global climate change. I think an entire PhD dissertation could be researched and written using these resources with random sampling of websites and drawing conclusions. Would be a very interesting project. Then in 2018, I taught a course on this subject, and I compiled a bibliography of 59 pages with 767 citations. And I've here ranked them according to decades until the most recent. And again, you can see this indicates increase in interest in academic publications and scientific publications on this subject. And I find all of this very, very hopeful, very positive. There's so much about the environment and of course other things in the news that is quite depressing, but this is very positive, hopeful, encouraging. There are, however, problems, as with anything. And for one, I think it's important to distinguish Buddhism and Buddhists. Buddhists range from ardent, strict followers to people who are simply nominal, shallow, if you want, Buddhists, and everything in between. And there's a difference between ideals and approximating those ideals in action. Buddhism as a religion, as a lived religion. Kenneth Kraft, another Buddhist scholar and environmentalist, has referred to eco-karma. Again, we could take the key concepts of Buddhism and preface them with eco and think about that. And I think it would lead to some interesting insights. There's also the dilemma of, are you into Buddhism simply for yourself? It's a paradox, a form of escapism, seeking nirvana, or are you, in addition, beyond seeking nirvana, into socially engaged Buddhism? As, for example, the idea in Eastern Buddhism of the Bodhisattvas. And the future of Buddhism, I think there's already a revitalization movement in many ways. And I think that is going to also increase in time. One critic, a very vocal, recurrent critic, is Ian Harris. And he has several articles in the Journal of Buddhist Ethics, which is available online, free access, a wonderful resource. And his basic argument is that Westerners interested in the environment have appropriated Buddhism for that purpose, and they have been unfaithful to the texts. I think that's easily refuted or rebutted. For example, there are also Asians, as I've already mentioned, who see the relevance of texts and Buddhism for ecology and environmentalism. Also, Buddhism is not static, it's dynamic and adaptive. It has endured for over 2,500 years in its application to new circumstances, different times, different places, different cultures, different countries, etc., etc. It persists and thrives. There are also recent critiques of these ideas that we're talking about, in particular, Johan Elverskog, a scholar, published the book, The Buddha's Footprint, about the environmental history of Asia. And he argues basically that Buddhism facilitates the creation of wealth, that it's a prosperity theology. And I've reviewed that book and this other one on Mongolia in a journal. And you can also see on YouTube a lecture by Elverskog. I think his argument is easily refuted, as I do in that article. For one thing, he only considers Buddhism. What about the other religions in Asia? And what about secular factors as well that are impacting the environment? But these are fascinating books to read and stimulate your thinking. I'm coming towards the end here and watching the clock as best I can, maybe 5 minutes yet at most. The Economist had an interesting article about animal release, which in Shanghai involves annually over 200 million fish, snakes, turtles, etc., released into the environment. And some people worry that this disrupts local ecosystems. This release of animals, first they're captured, of course, and caged or contained, and then they're released in order to gain merit. But this is really problematic from an ecological perspective. And here I'll let you read this cartoon, please. Well, Hagar isn't a Buddhist, but his companion suggested he try to be a vegetarian, and that was his excuse, that cows are vegetarians, so he can eat a steak. Also, there's the commercialization, the materialism, and the consumerism of Buddhism, especially in American culture. And sometimes meditation trainers, centers are excessive in their materialism and consumerism. Magazines like Tricycle, Buddhist Review, and others sustain publishing by having advertisements. And you can see those advertisements sometimes involves commercialization of Buddhism. And I think that is problematic. And finally, some sources. 1997, this book I mentioned before is really for academics or anyone who's interested in plowing into it. This is a little more a popular version in the year 2000. In the years 1990s, a number of books have been published. And incidentally, in Dharma Gaia, there's a very interesting article on Zen and a sense of place by Doug Kodiga. And I also forgot to mention when I was citing the bibliography I compiled, that in the 1970s, among the 10 articles on Buddhist ecology or environmentalism was one by Alfred Bloom. Alfred Bloom. Some of you probably know him or know of him. And it's a nice article, not only of historical interest, but a lot of the points he makes still pertain to this day. And recent books on, very recent, the last few years, and the one by Thich Nhat Hanh, I think that might be his last book, all on this subject and highly recommended. Loy is a Zen minister. Stephanie Kaza is a retired professor from the University of Vermont. These are all Zen Buddhists. And we have an article in the Forum on Religion Ecology, which would also summarize and have more detail on what I've been talking about. And if you go to the website, you can find it. It's free online. And I mention it because the Forum on Religion and Ecology is a wonderful resource for religions, including Buddhism. A lot of material. And we also have a chapter in this book on teaching Buddhism, which elaborates again on some of what I've been highlighting. And finally, the last slide, be a lamp unto your feet, a phrase from the Buddha, which basically means think for yourself, experience, think, and decide for yourself whether or not Buddhism is natural wisdom. So these are some meditations on that subject, and I invite you to meditate even more, and including on the Earth Day, which is coming up, I think 5 or 6 days from now. And I would mention Happy Earth Day to all of you folks. And of course, every day should be Earth Day. And in fact, every minute is actually Earth Day, because every inhalation of air you take in is thanks to the earth. And of course, our food, our water, and so forth. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sponsel. That was inspiring. I want to call on Purani to introduce our first respondent. Purani?
Okay, changing place here. Okay, yeah, let me. Good afternoon, everyone, and with great honor to introduce you to, actually many of you already know her very well. We know her in the name of Purani, and however, what her full name would be the Reverend Wako Purani Burgess, and people just know her by Purani, and I think that the name that she chose, she has 3 different names, right? And then if you want to know more about her, you can Google, and the one that had a lot of information about her is API Women Faith Action. As I put in on the website, she is Saint Priest. That's why her correct title would be Reverend Wako Purani. And actually, it's been over 40 years that she involved in the Native Hawaiian sovereignty movement and several key community struggles. And she's still active until now. And I have a honor and very fortunate that to know her for many years since the early 1980, when I'm working on this concept of ecofeminism for the women's study program at University of Hawaii. And we met there. And then she one of the role model of my ecofeminist. Many people don't like the term feminist because it has the political component in there. And so even the action that these women doing in terms of leading, in terms of women leader, and also try to preserve nature. Anyway, Purani also work with young people, and I recall the story that really is still in my heart. She said, when you work with young people, you will see different view because you're taller than young children. So what you see and what the children see is different viewpoint. That's still in my heart and mind every time when I do my mediation as well. And so you have to be at the same level as when you talk with children, you have to sit down at the same level so you see the world the way they see it, not only from your viewpoint. So again, Wanani has been recognized by many organizations and also in our Hongpa Hongwanji mission of Hawaii. In the year 2009, she is one of the honoree. So we will hear her insightful and inspirational comment on this topic. And so please, Wanani, we welcome you and with great respect, Wanani.
Porani, thank you so much. It's really interesting to be greeted by a friend who comes from a really different time in one's life. You know, the place where we're growing up and trying to figure out our way. So I'm so happy to be reacquainted to you. And Dr. Sponsel, thank you for creating the itch to create the conversation around these issues of Buddhism and ecology, but really around what is a true relationship between humans and other beings. It's really what is the core of the battle. I want to tell you two stories as part of my response. One will demonstrate how I think of myself as a Zen Buddhist, and it comes from the way I've been taught by my Zen master, Tanoi Roshi. So before he passed away, Tanoi gave the priest in the dojo a couple of talks, and it was supposed to be talks that would nourish us and would keep us grounded when he was gone. So in that talk, what he did was he rolled into the dojo a big log and a big stone. And then he asked us, the priest, what does the artist do with this rock and with this log? And eventually one of the priests raised his hand and said, carve something beautiful. And so Tanoi said, no, all the artist does is remove rubbish because the beauty is already in that rock. It's in that log. And when we take away the rubbish, that beauty can emerge. And so how this conversation really emerges the understanding of what our relationship is to other beings. I sometimes think about what happened when Aina became property. When generations ago, when Aina was only that sacred place that we held dear and that we treated respectfully. But then a different way of thinking about things came into being in Hawaii. And so Aina became property. It became chattel, something that you could bargain away and you didn't have to attach with it any sacred notions of protection, of respect. And so how land Aina became merely a thing. I think that is one of the things that we have to reckon with, is that change over from different systems and ways of treating living beings, living things like trees. A tree is not lumber, and yet that's its usefulness, is how it can be utilized in a human perspective. But just in and of itself, from a Hawaiian perspective, when we say aloha kako, we're saying aloha to everything, every being. And we are saying it to every being as equals. Human beings are not better than the tree or the shrimp or the crab. We are equal to. And so my question has been, how do we, in this moment in time, how do we treat all those beings with respect to the point where they get a vote? How do forests vote for what they need and for what we need to produce and help them with, how do they have a say in the government and governance of Hawaii? So it feels like in Buddhism, those questions are allowable. And not only that, but with Buddhists, it's actionable. And I think, that ability to bring action and philosophy, possibilities and necessity all together in a house so that we can think and talk about it together. That's what the Buddhism Association offers the humanity in Hawaii. It allows people to have a space in which they are not the only beings recognized as important, but they are one of. And the fact that we know our place, I think, is important in what you said, Dr. Sponsel, and how we treat the Aina and all the living beings. They and we are part of a kinship. We are not better than them. We do not own them, but we are all equal to each other. And how do we have that conversation with them and not just about them? I think that's the core of what I get out of the possibilities less of your conversation, and the fact that the Hawaii Association of International Buddhists is willing to have a conversation like that. That is not just about what's good for humans. I want to send you a poem that I wrote, which is about that, about kako, and about humans recognizing that we are part of a whole world of beings. And how do we take our place, but not be the be all and end all of the world? So, Dr. Sponsel, I really appreciate your point of view, the scholarship with which you enter this conversation, and that you bring both a Western perspective and a Buddhist perspective to the center so that we can have this compassionate and deep conversation with, and hopefully we will bring the taro and the kukui nut and the fish into the circle with us as we have this conversation. So, Porani, I appreciate you reaching out to me to include me in this conversation. And I appreciate you, Dr. Sponsel, for being able to put out the ideas and take the risks of bringing more than just humans into the circle. Okay. Mahalo.
Thank you so much. Our next responder will be introduced by Karma Alexei. I'm sorry, by Reverend Jiko will introduce Karma Alexei Somo. Reverend Jiko.
Karma Lekshe Somo is a Buddhist nun, scholar, and social activist. She is a professor of religious studies at the University of San Diego. She is co-founder of the Sakyadhita International Association of Buddhist Women and the founding director of the Jamyang Foundation, which supports the education of women and girls in the Himalayan region, the Chittagong Hill Tracts of Bangladesh, and elsewhere. She is currently working to create LAITY Peace Center as a resource for peace education, Buddhist studies, and community service programs under the auspices of Sakyadhita Hawaii. With great joy, I introduce to you Karma Lekshe Somo.
Aloha kako. I'm very pleased to be with you today, and very honored to speak among such insightful and wise beings. Thank you very much, Dr. Sponsel and Reverend Puanani, for your wisdom. I'm coming to you from LAITY Peace Center out in Wailua, overlooking the ocean and looking out on the trees. Every day we're planting trees. Some of you have also been out here and planted some trees. So I'm full of gratitude for your contributions. We're trying to restore the land and create world peace and live a simple life in harmony with the land. This is the land that the Hawaiians have preserved for generations, for centuries, and also the wisdom on how to restore and protect the land. So we're very grateful. This aligns, of course, with Buddhist values, living a simple life, voluntary simplicity, as was said, rejecting the allure of consumerism, which is really causing so many problems and looks like it is endangering the lives of all of us and all of life. This morning's news said that in 1 year, 11 million tons of plastic have been dumped into the oceans. And this is set to triple in the next 20 years. So, of course, all of us here have good intentions. None of us wants to trash the earth. But I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge all of us to look at our own consumer habits, our patterns, and see how we can improve, especially in the use of plastics and so on. What are we doing to help restore the earth? And in what ways are we complicit in this destruction? And of course, we cannot ignore the implications of politics and economics and gender in all of this. So it's a huge conversation. We're just more or less beginning right here. We try to live a simple lifestyle. I would actually recommend a minimalist lifestyle. I think it's a really good goal. Sometimes it feels like we're spitting at the wind in the face of the corporations and the military and all of the developers and so on. But I think we have to do our best. And this way, at least we can sleep soundly at night that we did our part to try to stave off and preserve the sacred ecosystem. Yeah, so watching the biodiversity, watching the, growing crown flower, the favorite flower of Queen Liliuokalani, and watching the caterpillars turn into the chrysalis and then into the monarch butterflies. Wow, it's just so cool. And then introducing school children and UH students and Chaminade students to the beauty of the ecosystem that's right in front of our eyes. So in all of this, I ask all of you to cooperate. As Buddhists, I think we especially have a great responsibility to try to do our best to preserve all of life. And so I would like to maybe recall the Buddhist teaching on to listen to the teachings, to contemplate the teachings, and then to practice the teachings. So that would mean we listen to all of this wisdom about how to restore and preserve our environment. Then we contemplate on it, and then we try to put it into action. So I challenge you all of us, let's see what we can do to try to save the planet. Thank you. Aloha.
Thank you so much, Lexi. Your challenge is a welcome one and a needed one. I want to introduce our next responder, Doug Kodiga. Doug is an attorney specializing in energy and environmental law. Doug founded Hawaii's first climate and sustainability law practice group in 2007 and frequently publishes and lectures on clean energy and climate change climate change law and policy in Hawaii and in the Asia Pacific region. I've known Doug for many years, and it's a pleasure to have him as a respondent this afternoon. Doug's love of mountains and rivers and the plants and animals of the world inspires his life and his work. And his love of the Buddha way and many years of Zen practice have taken him deeply into the vast and fathomless realms of the Dharma. Doug, glad to have you.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Not sure quite what to say after that, but I appreciate the introduction. And I have to say, it's really a treat to see so many old friends, and I'm humbled and honored to join you and offer a few quick remarks as we wrap up. And let me just reiterate my mahalo to the HAVE board, and to Michael, to you as my teacher, and Les, it's been many years. I appreciate your ongoing efforts, and Purni as well. And Punani, thank you for your inspiring words. And Commercialization, Samo, it's been a long time, and it's wonderful to hear your voice. I think I'm gonna first applaud everybody's stamina for making it this far in this proceeding. And I know it's, I'll be wrapping up. So I'm gonna try to move pretty quickly through a few key points, and so that there's time for questions before you adjourn for your annual meeting. I'm going to focus just on three key observations that draw from Dr. Sponsel's presentation. One is that I think it's clear that Dharma practice is not passive. This is something that's we would want to avoid making the mistake ever, myself, speaking to myself and others, that the Dharma practice is anything other than direct engagement with the present moment. There's nothing passive about it, it's passionate. And that's exactly what is called for in these times. It's also extremely practical, in my view, because that is also what's necessary. I think about Mahatma Gandhi. Before he was the Mahatma, was an attorney in South Africa, many of you probably know, for over 20 years, with a very strict adherence to the facts. One time he was involved in a matter that involved a fire that had burned down a building, and it was described by someone in his office in a certain manner, and he thought it was otherwise, and he spent several hours driving in a car out to that scene, and they got out of the car and he pointed to it and he said, "Did that burn down the way?" And that person said, "No, not quite." So there's this rigorous adherence to the facts and a very pragmatic and active and passionate approach. What we're detached from is not anything other than our preoccupation with the self. So again, it's a mistake to think that we're detached from anything else. As Aiken Roshi, my teacher, used to say, if I was detached from books and art and family and friends, I would be dead. So this is, it's not so much that we're detached from everything or the world, but we're detached from our preoccupation with the self and quite passionately attached to the things that we wish to preserve. A second point is a little bit more subtle perhaps, but there can be mistaken thinking that one has to reach some sort of attainment or have some kind of understanding before one moves into the world and takes action on these issues. Many years ago, I was fortunate to head up a small nonprofit organization teaching meditation and yoga to lawyers and to attorneys, judges, law students, and so forth. And I remember at the end of one of our retreats, a law student was puzzling how, I've been exposed to mindfulness teachings. How do I apply this as a lawyer? How do I take this mindfulness and apply it to my work in the law? And of course, the answer is, of course, is exactly the opposite of that. What has to be done is to ground oneself in Dharma practice and then come forth from that place. So it's really quite the opposite. We're not looking at taking up a set of concepts or tools and sort of trying to somehow work them in to our repertoire. Really, we want to be as deeply grounded as we possibly can, and then come forth from that place. As the Diamond Sutra teaches us, dwell nowhere, and come forth from that place. And this is also reflected in the old saying, 1 inch incense, 1 inch Buddha, in the sense that we practice, and that's how we embody, and that's how we manifest what the actions that we will take moment by moment, day by day, to take the actions that are able to address the issues identified by Dr. Sponsel and by Punani and Carmeleksha here today. At least that's how I see it. And then the third point I'll leave you with is just that, we have to be comfortable with not knowing. and this can be the hardest part. Our tendency would be to seek to identify and hold on to a solution, an approach, something rather fixed because it provides comfort and some level of certainty. But of course, radical uncertainty is the source of true change, in my view and in my experience. That requires remaining completely open as much as possible to impermanence, to the fact that everything changes and nothing stays the same. This, of course, was arguably the fundamental insight of these traditions, of our tradition, which is that impermanence is Buddha nature itself. So when we start to get more comfortable with that, which comes, I believe, from practice, we see the wisdom in case 20 of the Record of Ease. Master Tsitsang said, quote, "Not knowing is most intimate." So we slowly become a little bit more comfortable over time with not knowing. Aiken Roshi, our teacher, often used the term intimacy, to become intimate with what's happening in the present moment. This is really powerful. I think this can give rise to a kind of fearlessness, not in a reckless way or sort of an unconsidered way, but because one is grounded in what's really real, then one can have the kind of fearlessness that is needed to address these incredibly complex and seemingly overwhelming kinds of issues. And then finally, the final thought I'll leave you with, as well, is being grounded in this sort of not knowing, which I think is really at the core of our tradition, can give rise to a kind of solidarity. And I think that's one of the missing pieces, among perhaps others, is that we need to encompass others, embrace others, realize our roles, without blaming or shifting blame to others, realizing how we embody and include others in our lives, in our practice. And this is really a key, I think, to moving forward on these kinds of incredibly complex issues. I have to say, one of my favorite takeaways from today is on Dr. Sponsel, one of your slides, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu saying, "Nibbana is the pinnacle of nature." That's a wonderful thought. And I thank you for that. And I thank all of you for your attention today. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Beautiful. And a further challenge in a way for us with inspiration. And we have a few minutes now to open it up. We probably go a little past 2:30 here. But I do want to give everyone the chance to ask a question. You can raise your hand, or you can put your question in the chat, or maybe some of you have emailed your questions prior or during the event here. We're going to try to alternate back and forth here between questions raised live and those submitted in text form in the chat or by email. Porani will be looking out for those, and I will call on folks here present in the room, as it were. When you ask your question, if you would, please direct it to Dr. Sponsel or one of our respondents. If you don't have a particular person you want to direct it to, then I will just ask our Dr. Sponsel and our respondents for one of them to step forward and respond to it. We won't have time, and we want to try to get to a few of your different questions, so I won't ask everyone to respond to one question. We'll just have one response per question. Again, if things seem to go on a bit long, I may interject myself and try to keep things focused. I would ask you to make your question focused and to the point, and for our responders to be succinct if they can, so that we can hear from a number of you. All right, let's jump into it. Who has a question they would like to ask? And I'm going to look for hands here. I see Bob Bus there. Bob, would you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I have a question. I think it came across when Doug was talking, and I wonder, as you were making the points, there's a kind of a playfulness even in the ritual of responding to this. And I was thinking in New Zealand, they're now starting to have legal designations of trees as legal persons. And I wonder if you could respond on that. Is that something that you see as a good step to kind of, create new persons or new selves out there in that way?
Is that directed to me? I assume it might be.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is, it's interesting. Christopher Stone at the University of Southern California wrote an essay, a seminal essay back in the 70s. It was cited by William O. Douglas in US Supreme Court decisions. Titled the essay is "Should Trees Have Standing?" So the notion that inanimate, quote unquote, inanimate trees, rivers, mountains should have legal standing has been around for some time before that. Of course, his essay traced sort of the historic origins of that doctrine. So, I mean, to me, it is one potentially interesting approach. It hasn't really gained a whole lot of traction over the years. It's been many decades. What I like about it is it illustrates the potential resilience and adaptability of institutions. The rule of law is one that I'm particularly aware of and perhaps fond of. And that, its ability to adapt and address these kinds of somewhat extreme challenges related to climate change, for example, is something that's quite interesting. So yeah, you look at other jurisdictions, New Zealand, other places, and they're making advances, and it's quite intriguing. And you see, of course, there's the cliches about things that seem sort of beyond the pale, become quite, yesterday become the norm tomorrow. So that is certainly possible. Yeah, I think what
Thank
it
you,
shows
Doug.
most. Okay.
Porny, do we have a question from the chat or from email?
Email, I couldn't get your email because the email I'm using computer. From the
Okay.
chat, there's no question at this time, and except there's one announcement from Gregory Yuan that may be interesting. Tricycle Magazine is sponsoring a weekend virtual summit called the Buddhism and Ecology Summit from April 18 to 22nd. And yeah, and then say anyone, no one else asked question on chat yet. Just accept that good information. And also just to let people know, I put the website for the detailed biography for Purnani if you want to know more about her extensive work on the chat. So we will try to make a use of the chat. Anyone has question here? There are several questions from Nico. Where are the questions, Nico?
There are two questions in the chat, one from Strada Dharma Judd and one from Ken Okimoto. Did you want me to read the first one?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, please.
Can you address the seeming disparity between vegetarianism versus being a locavore, especially in Hawaii, where vegetable-based protein is shipped in, adding to our carbon footprint?
So to whom then?
I think that was
to a particular person, or
I don't think so. No,
okay.
The other one is also, yeah.
Would like to take that up.
Well, I'm not sure there's necessarily a contradiction here because when 85% of our food is shipped in, I'm not sure the distinction between local and foreign vegetable protein is the major issue here. But transforming our eating choices is really important to the whole structure of the ecological crisis. I don't think we can deny that. So if you read the statistics on the fallout from eating animals, it's pretty shocking. So I think we have to take that into consideration for sure, along with our other consumer choices.
Thank you. Anyone else here present? Yes, Lilipu.
Yes, hi. Thank you, everybody. It was very informative and well presented. I had a question about catch and release animal, that practice. It was mentioned in the presentation. And I'm wondering, in Hawaii specifically, does anybody know what would be an ecological creature to catch and release? Typically, people buy crickets, I guess. I've heard people do that, buy crickets from pet stores and release them in the marshes. But I'm not so sure that's ecologically sound either. Does that upset the ecosystem? And also, I've witnessed people releasing those crickets and then watching the birds eat them up, kill them and eat them up right away. So I'm just wondering how effective that whole thing is.
That directed anybody in particular, Lily?
No, just if anybody knows of any good or yeah, are there any good candidates for this activity?
Releasing.
Okay, Les can answer that one.
Great.
Les,
I'll
sit there.
I'll try. I think there are other ways to gain merit.
Sorry.
And when you capture an animal, it's suffering. And when you release it, it may also be suffering in various ways. So I think that practice is really problematic. And there should be other ways to earn merit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nikos, we had one from, was it Mr. Okimoto?
Yeah, did you want me to read it or did you want to read it?
No, please read it.
Okay. For us who are involved in temple sanghas using the American nonprofit corporation model, how can we guide ourselves and measure ourselves in progress toward a more Buddhistic Sangha? For example, has someone developed a gross temple Sangha happiness measurement tool? And this is along kind of the same question that I had, is that, what can a Dharma practitioner in community or, by themselves do, to bring awareness and to practice a more ecologically sustainable life? I mean, it's hard here because everything is imported. I find myself driving here far more than I did in California. So that's wide open. Mahalo.
Who would like to respond of our four?
You can say.
Well, I don't have all the answers to all the questions, and I would love to have some answers, more answers, but it seems to me that part of one answer might be for Buddhist centers and temples here to communicate with one another more about what they're doing to be more sustainable and green in their practices and to reduce their ecological footprint. And I think HABE in particular could really facilitate a dialogue, maybe even a debate about what different centers are doing and gain from one another insights and information.
That's a wonderful idea. Maybe this can be a start. There has been a little bit of that. We need a lot more, as is suggested. Out of deference to our schedule and those who need to get going, we're going to end this part of our program here and take a 5-minute break. I want to extend my profound gratitude to Dr. Sponsel, to Puanani Burgess, and to Carmelexé Somo, and to Doug Kodiga for your wisdom and your offerings today. we're going to take a 5-minute break, and I would ask you all to come back, and we're going to have a short annual meeting of HABE. We'll talk a little bit more about what HABE is and hear from some of the directors of our organization and what inspires them about our organization. No more than a half hour, possibly less. So please take a break, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you.